Okay. We go to the committee and board recommendations. Number 9 is correspondence. 9.1 BC Housing request for reconsideration for 352 Winnipeg Street and related correspondence. And Council, how would you like to proceed? The request is to reconsider denial or temporary use permit for 352 Winnipeg Street. Councilor Robinson.
If I can find it here, sorry, I'm flipping between between several of my electronic events. I would like to move that Council receive into the record the correspondence dated March 8th, 2021 from BC Housing and deny the request to reconsider the rejection of the temporary use application for the emergency shelter at 352 Winnipeg Street until March 31st, 2022.
Okay, I need a seconder, and Councilor Sentas is the seconder. Okay, Council, comments? Councilor Broomfield? And then Councilor Rigger.
Thank you, Mayor, and through the chair. We know where we're at. We've heard reports where we're at as a community. I'd like to talk a little bit about how we got here and where we go from here. And I want to just tell people that as a city council, we have been speaking for the community at large. There is obviously a diverse community, but it is evident to me that we have the support of the majority of the community in the position that we've taken. And that position really comes out of a level of frustration and the bitter experience of past and present solutions that have not and are not working as planned and promised. And nobody is trying to ignore the plight of the homeless. Nobody's telling us to ignore them. Everybody that has written to us or given us messages of support for our position have also wanted us to find a solution to this issue. And so I think that leads us on to what do we do to find a solution? Well, we need to get back to the table. And who should be at the table? Well, as much as I'd love to be part of the solution around a table, I think that the elected politicians on both sides of the table should not be at the table. I think it should be staff and the experts who are far better qualified than us to find the solutions. But they should be working with a clear mandate from us and from BC Housing and the other groups, the other participants in finding the solution. They should be working with a clear mandate from their respective sides as to what constitutes an acceptable solution to the problem. And the way I see it is that I think that right now there should be three basic stakeholders at the table. It should be BC Housing, Interior Health, and the City of Penticton. There are other stakeholders, of course, RCMP and the judicial system, etc. But I think right now, the more people that are at the table, then the more confusing it's going to become. I think it needs to be really focused in finding the solution. And I think that we've had some people questioning us about our commitment to a solution. And I just want to say that, reiterate the numbers that I've given before, in that Penticton has always been a willing partner in finding or trying to find solutions to the homeless issue. We have willingly partnered with provincial government on providing housing. And in fact, when it comes to supportive housing, Penticton has one supporting housing unit for every 143 residents in the city, compared to one for every over 300 people in Kelowna, and one for every 495 in Vernon, and one for every 3,600 in the rest of BC. So nobody can say that we haven't done our bit in the past. But we support a housing first policy. But right now, what it feels like is we have a housing only policy, because it's the wraparound services that are supposed to go with that housing first policy that seem to be part of the problem. And certainly as far as the citizens are seeing it. And of course, we speak for the citizens. So that is the message that we carry on behalf of the citizens of the city. We really want to see, what we don't want to see, we don't want to see Penticton becoming a battleground for the homeless on the homeless issue. What we would really love to see, I think, is for Penticton to become a model of how to help the homeless in an effective manner. And how do we ensure that happens? Well, in thinking about this and in discussions that I've had with other people who have had great interest on this question, when the city deals with a developer, we put a performance bond on a development where they come along and say, we want to build a condo building and we're going to have a landscaping plan, and this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to build. Well, the city, we make them pay a bond to the landscaping so that we know that the landscaping is going to get done, because we know from past experience that once they've sold all the condos, they kind of forget the landscaping unless we hold them to it. And we do that with other private entities within the city as well. And I believe that we've just negotiated a performance bond with a casino. So holding the other stakeholders on the supportive housing units to a performance bond might be a way of ensuring that the various agencies do what they promise they're going to do. And it would be a way to, I think, satisfy the citizens of the city that the various agencies are going to do what they promise to do, and we're doing our part to help make sure that that gets done. And that's just one idea. I mean, there's going to be other excellent ideas that I don't know about or I haven't thought about. And one of the things, when you think about all of this going on, this process is going to take longer than 2 weeks. We're looking at a 2-week deadline for a closure of the homeless shelter, which is housing 42 people. And I just want it to be known that we have the well-being of those 42 people at stake. And I don't think we should take that lightly. And solving this issue, like I say, is going to take longer than 2 weeks. And so over the past few days, I was actually considering making a motion to extend the closure of the homeless shelter by 2-3 months until a plan for how to move forward was formed. In recent discussions that we've had with the staff, and I'd like to hear from the staff about the various contingencies that have been put into place to house these 42 people when the shelter closes, so going for a transition period, then if that is in fact a firm commitment from the other property holders within the city, then I would be willing to support this motion. But I would like to hear from staff first before I make that decision. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Lavin, did you want to make comments now or after City Council has spoken?
Up to you, Your Worship.
Okay. Go ahead, answer Councilor Broomfield's question.
Sure, I can, and I want to preface these comments with a statement. Tenant, patient, resident relocation, whether it's a developer redeveloping a property or a housing or other agency, transitioning patients or residents into or outside of a facility is not normally a city mandate. This is a process that happens all the time as lands redevelop and as facilities open and close. For example, BC Housing just opened a cold weather shelter in one of our local church basements during the last cold snap for a dozen or so individuals. That facility was opened and decommissioned with a notice to council, but not any expectation that the city come up with a plan to help those individuals transition to other housing. An exception of this would certainly be for lands that the city owns. A recent example is the Shillings Motel, where the city took an active and successful role in relocating and finding housing for all of those residents that were in that facility. But what we're talking about today, I mean, this is an occurrence that happens every year when funding for the winter shelter closes. What's an outlier? This isn't an outlier. This is something that happens every year. What's not an outlier is the location that we're talking about today. This particular facility was established, and I'd say, with the tacit agreement of the neighborhood on a temporary approval, but certainly, against the wishes of that neighborhood for anything temporary or permanent in that location. This was a replacement of beds for the cold weather shelter that normally happens in our existing emergency shelter due to COVID. This had to do with the fact that we couldn't accommodate the number of beds that we always do in our emergency shelter, which is located at Compass Court due to COVID. We do understand now that this population, the vulnerable population, is being vaccinated in this phase of the vaccination rollout. And we have inquired whether vaccinating this population will impact the number of folks that can be accommodated at Compass Court. So I think this is certainly one option that we can explore, and it could be a relatively quick option to explore in relocating some of these individuals back into the shelter that is supposed to accommodate them. I will also mention, and again, I wouldn't say, and I'd be careful putting this on the city to always help with these transition plans, but through our social development function, we have been kind of brainstorming, working our contacts to try to come up and see what options exist in the community to help here. And we have made ourselves available, the city resources available to BC Housing as well as housing agencies in negotiating agreements with our moteliers. We've identified several opportunities there. We have developers who own several units up for redevelopment that could make units available again through partnerships with BC Housing or agencies. And we feel the potential here would certainly, accommodate a good portion of the folks that we're talking about. The Compass Court still has one phase left to open. We understand that that phase has been under construction. We've offered to expedite that to ensure that those units can open up, and that could potentially accommodate another 24 individuals. We're exploring opportunities with our faith-based organizations to see if they can make some of their properties available on a temporary and emergency basis. And finally, we're working with our safety and security advisory committee on options for locating this. And that's more of a long-term solution, but we're certainly having those discussions. So we've made ourselves available to BC Housing to have these discussions, our housing agencies to have these discussions. And we consider that there is the ability to transition these folks to more appropriate locations if the will is there to put such a plan into place. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rigger. And before I go to Councillor Rigger, I'll tell you that I've been doing most of the talking on behalf of City Council for the last 3 weeks to a month. And today I'm going to say as little as possible, and I'll be to the point, but I am giving the opportunity to every city councillor to please speak up. Say what you want to say. Don't be afraid or shy to say what you wish to say, even if you are repeating yourself as to what we've said in the past. It doesn't matter if you repeat yourself. I'd like to hear what you have to say, and I'd like the public and the taxpayers of the city of Penticton to hear what you have to say. And I just hope that the media picks it up and reports it as you say it. Okay, Councillor Rigger and then Councillor Campbell.
Thank you to the Mayor. I think what Councillor Bloomfield has brought forward is very productive type of approach, and that's a necessary approach, because certainly we all want to ensure that there are solutions found here. I'll confess, though, I've put together some thoughts here, and I'd say probably a little bit more reactive rather than the full solutions oriented. But I think all councillors would agree that we've received a significant amount of feedback from the community, both the community that's close to this 352 Winnipeg address, the shelter. But also other areas. But the number of letters from people that are just crying out for some type of support, either that their bedrooms are on the laneways that pick up all the noises day and night from these shelters, or other such things. So just with that as a bit of background, go through a few comments here. So. The province of British Columbia used to operate the Riverview Hospital, or mental hospital, I think referred to at times, but in Coquitlam, for the treatment of mental illness and drug addiction for the province. This hospital was closed over a period of years, but even in 2002, there were 800 beds at Riverview. One of the rationales for the closure of Riverview was that mental health and drug addiction support could be better served in smaller regional facilities. The government of the day committed that before closure of Riverview Hospital, community-based mental health and drug recovery programs would be provided. In 2013, so this is getting about 10 years after the closure had occurred, concerns were raised by the Greater Vancouver municipalities about the number of mentally ill and drug-dependent people living on Lower Mainland streets, particularly downtown Vancouver East Side. And this concern led to a motion passed at UBCM, the Union of BC Municipalities, requesting the Riverview Hospital reopen. This resolution was passed, but certainly it wasn't reopened. But what that motion did do is it flagged that in 2013, and that wasn't the beginning, that there was a real growing concern with homelessness. So today, Penticton has a large homeless population with mental health and drug addiction problems. Most of these individuals are living in supportive housing or some level of temporary housing. It is highly unlikely that Penticton residents make up 80% of this homeless population, as reported by Minister Eby. It's important, and I say that in part that Penticton's about a 33,000 population, and if you look at the, for instance, RDOS population, the report we just heard on housing, that's in the 80,000 population range, and suggesting that effectively in that survey we heard today, there's virtually no homeless identified in areas except for Penticton, and out of 80,000 population in the South Okanagan, Similkameen, and us with just 33,000, that seems highly unlikely. It's important to note that Penticton's level of supportive housing and shelter housing for this population is near the highest in the province. And that's similar to what Councillor Bloomfield said. A BC Housing report included in today's agenda provides a list of supported housing and shelters in the interior of BC. And an examination shows Penticton, based on our size, has the highest level of support of any community listed. Twice the level of Kelowna, which has more numbers than we do, but they're about 4 times our population. 3 times the level of Vernon. And it should be noted how many municipalities are not listed on this report because they have no support for homeless. We have done more than our share in Penticton. The real problem in the city is inadequate community-based mental health and drug recovery programs for individuals that are living in supportive housing and shelter housing. We've referred to that as wraparound services, I think, in discussions with Minister Eby. Some of these individuals are contributing to Penticton RCMP having the highest crime load in the province of British Columbia. Extra costs for Penticton taxpayers to support additional protection, emergency services, and other physical impacts to the community. And worst of all, the impact on Penticton residents and businesses that are near these facilities and threatened by the harassment, vandalism, trespassing, theft, and general disturbance that is not appreciated anywhere, but even worse in an area surrounded by senior facilities. For these and other reasons, I would not support an extension of the temporary use permit, at least not for a long-term extension. So recognizing the motion that's on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rigger. Councillor Watt.
Thank you, through the chair. I appreciate what's been said so far. And I think what's happening is that we're seeing a shift. And the shift is to manage the behaviors and the community impact of the people who live in BC housing facilities. I think that the province has a mandate to manage the homeless and the addicted, and we're committed to doing what we can in forms of support from a financial aspect for RCMP and bylaw. And I think that the message from our community, on the other hand, is quite frankly that they are very clear that we should not be sacrificing safety and security for any group. And so we need to find ways to manage this collaboration, which is what it ultimately needs to be. But at the end of the day, we, and I mean, when I say we, I don't think I'm just talking about Penticton anymore, but certainly that's where our head needs to be. But we cannot accept the consequences of ineffectively managed BC housing facilities. And I suspect we are being watched right now, and that's how it's going to come out. But I will stand by that. I don't believe that the BC housing facilities are getting the correct support, are getting the correct people. And for whatever reason, our community is paying the price for those inadequacies. And I no longer think that's fair. And what we've done isn't say we're turning our backs on 20, 40, 50 residents. It's saying we need to find a way to make this effective and make it effective together for a whole community. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Councillor Robinson, Councillor Santos, anything?
Yeah.
Councillor Robinson and then Councillor Santos.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to refer to a letter to the editor from one of our former mayors, Beth Campbell, and just read a short portion of it that really struck me as a councillor. She said, quote, "Our elected representatives have a duty to make decisions that are in the best interests of the community as a whole, and their decisions must reflect those of the citizens who are most affected by any given issue." The provincial government had every opportunity during the temporary use timeframe to resolve an issue that clearly falls within their area of responsibility, end quote. Our council reluctantly approved a temporary emergency winter shelter. And at that time, council made an ironclad promise to that neighborhood that this inappropriate location would indeed be temporary, and I will not break that commitment to our citizens. An extension of this use is not in our community's best interest. And in the council, the province asked council to reconsider this issue, I would also like to ask the minister to take into consideration and reconsider the fact that, just take into consideration that the vulnerable senior population that lives right next door to this shelter, who have earned the right to live in peace without intimidation, harassment, and fear. That's our commitment to this neighborhood. And these seniors are equally, if not more so, vulnerable than the population in this shelter. So as a councillor, we have a duty to all of our citizens. And these so-called wraparound services that were promised when we opened up the supportive housing units in our town continue to be non-existent. Earlier, we had a report from the Safety and Security Advisory Committee, and this comes from the service providers themselves. And therein lies the real problem that is not being addressed. And that goes back to what my fellow councillors have all just mentioned. And just to finish off, I wanted to say that our first responders, our RCMP, our fire department, our EHS are all buckling under this pressure. And it's starting to show all the cracks at the seams, because we cannot continue down this road. And there must be a solution to it, and we must work on it together in a constructive manner. And I believe that Councillor Bloomfield has made several of those suggestions that perhaps we can move in that direction to finally resolve this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Santos.
Thank you, Mayor Vasilaki. Well, my colleagues have all expressed the issues around this concern very eloquently, and I'm in support of what they have said. The role of a councillor, as former Mayor Beth Campbell has stated, is not an easy one, but it's one of balance. We have to consider the entire community's best interests. And in doing so, as has already been highlighted, there are 3 significant seniors facilities around this location. And they are giving us more and more evidence of their anxiety, of their fear, because there's no respect for the people accessing this facility of housing for 42 residents, of the seniors who were there first. And I'm acutely aware of that. And so I have to say, I stand with the decision of council that we have looked at it again, and our stand is that facility was only given temporary use, and reluctance is the word that's been used about our agreement to that. It was with reluctance because of all those seniors, because of the very safety and security of our community, ambulance, fire, RCMP, being taxed beyond their limits, that we had to do that. So I believe that stands. However, we have always said from the very beginning, we are open to continuing the conversation of how resolution to this problem can be found. And I wish there would have been more of that in the very beginning. I'm not sure that in making that decision, what should be our partners in BC Housing, what should be our partners in the ministry, I'm not sure they knew that there were those 3 significant facilities for senior citizens around what they were choosing, where they were choosing to do it. And I think if we could have been part of the conversation, we could have possibly averted all of this. So, you know, that there has to be respect, there has to be trust. And I am hoping that what this has identified is that we need to come back to that. And so I applaud my fellow councillors. I think they've spoken well, they've spoken eloquently. And I will tell you, I'm a councillor a long time, as you know. I have never received as many emails as I have through this conversation. And to those who feel that council has been cold-hearted and unsympathetic, I can only reassure you that that isn't true. We have anguished over this, and not in one meeting, but in multitudes of meetings, trying to find the balance that I spoke to earlier. We recognize that the people need help, and I actually would welcome a conversation reopened about the establishment or reopening of facilities that are dedicated to helping people with mental health issues, with addictions, because the wraparound services, the way we're going, does not fall in line behind the housing. And the housing aspect is a wonderful philosophy, but it's not just that. It's let's get there to be housing, and then the wraparound services. That's critical to their success. That happens when it is in a specific place, I think, better than what is happening now. And I have one concern about a lot of data that was supplied to City Council from the ministry, from Minister Eby, and I will speak to the Discovery House on Winnipeg Street. The Penticton Recovery Resource Society is the correct and legal title of Discovery House, and it indicates that that facility is of special needs. I take exception to that. It is not of special needs. No. Those are recovery beds. That's a recovery program. And that's the only thing we really have is that program. It's a dry program, and it actually has success. And I think we need to draw more awareness to that program and follow through on how we can deliver that. So I stand with my fellow councillors in the name of what is good for the safety, security, well-being of our entire community. But in saying no to the extension we've been asked to reconsider, I say we're still open. Please, let's sit down and talk about it again, whatever that definition of who sits at the table. And there have been some good points about made who should be sitting at the table. But at no point did Penticton ever say or indicate that we had no further opportunity or desire to have conversation. That isn't true. We have, and to those in our community, I cannot tell you again how many hours we have spent in conversation, in trying to find the best solution. But I will say the first step in that is that place on Winnipeg Street is not the answer. And we gave them enough time that a solution could have been found. So in saying no again, I will reaffirm we are open to continuing conversation and looking to help these people. It's an interesting point too, that when these emergency cold weather shelters close in the past, because they do have a specific time frame from November 1 to the end of March. I have never had the amount of anxiety expressed by the government about where the people housed there were then going to go. It's good that they're recognizing that, but I think they have to work with our city in order to resolve it. So thank you, Mayor Vasilaki, for the opportunity to express my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Councillor Santos. I have never been as proud of this city council as I am at the present time in the magnificent way that they expressed to not only the media, but to the public and to the province, how our community feels about this situation. And I'm not going to go into repeating anything that City Council has said up to this point, as they did a magnificent job, as I said. But I'm going to go into the financial end of it on the province side, because it doesn't cost the city of Penticton or its taxpayers any money whatsoever. And I'd like to start with the $1.7 million that the province is thinking of spending in the next year in that facility that we're discussing today. I don't know if you folks did any of mathematically work it out as to what it's going to cost per resident of that facility, and the cost is $40,000 per resident. Now, how many families in the city of Penticton actually earn $40,000 to live and to raise their family, clothe them, put them to school, and all the other good things that they do to raise a good family that will end up being, how do I say it, to give something to society in return. And that's where I'm going to go in this case. Now, if they were going to take this $40,000 per resident and put it into a Riverview, as Councillor Rigger put forward, just think how much good they can do this, folks. Maybe they can get rid of their addictions and their mental illness and make them somewhat normal, so that they can live a better life and have a different type of life where they can help others instead of others helping them all the time. Now, that to me, that's one of the main things, and to me, it shows that governments don't use common sense when it comes to looking after people that have issues, such as the 42 residents in this facility. It just blows my mind. Now, the other thing I like to discuss is the Premier discussed a thing about democracy. And this is all part of democracy. Well, the Premier doesn't have to educate me on democracy. My ancestors brought democracy to the world, and it's still here. It's nothing modern. Democracy came to the world 3,000 years ago, back in 550 BC. That's when democracy was invented by the Athenians. It's nothing modern. And I only wish that modern governments would just practice a little bit of that democracy that he was talking about. Because in this case, democracy isn't used whatsoever. It's the big, heavy stick over our heads that he's trying to force us to do what he wants for whatever reason or whatever his agenda is. in this case. So I think I'm going to stop there because I've said everything in the last 3 weeks to a month, and I wanted City Council to have their say, which they did magnificently, and I am so proud of you guys. You don't know how proud I am. So unless there's any other comments or questions they have to ask of staff. And the other thing I omitted to say is that our staff has put resolutions in place. They've made, and you heard Mr. Lavin come up with all those solutions that they came up with, how they can take care of this, folks. Now, is the province listening? I have no idea. I hope they are, because if they're not, they're letting the people that they're trying to help down. Okay, any more comments or questions? Okay, then I'll ask the question to refuse to reconsider. That's what the question is. Okay, Councillor Broomfield.
In favor.
Councillor Rigger.
In favor.
Councillor Robinson.
In favor.
Councillor Santos.
In favor.
Councillor Watt.
In favor.
I'm also in favor, so the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Council. And you know, at this time, maybe we should take a 10-minute break because we have a huge agenda to follow after this. So we'll take a 10 minutes break. So we'll come back at exactly